Welcome back to Missing. I am Tim, here today with Lance. Lance, how are you today?
I'm doing so well today, Tim. I hope everyone who's listening, hope they're doing just as well as myself. We had this conversation with an old friend at this point of the show, an old friend in general, a really cool conversation that is taking advantage of what we were talking about later on, taking advantage of this newfound energy that is coming into this old, cold case, one of the most notorious of all times. But Tim, before we go down that rabbit hole, let's explore the rabbit hole of your mood. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks a lot for asking. We're recording this intro just mere days before the Christmas holiday, and these episodes, this is a two-part episode that is going to run on Christmas Day and the day after Christmas. So happy holidays to you, whatever holiday you celebrate. We're here to support you. But this recording was a live show with author John Wesley Anderson. And John Wesley Anderson is a former homicide detective, and he is now an author who wrote a book called Lou and JonBenét. And he actually was friends with Lou Smit. Lou Smit was hired by the Boulder District Attorney's Office to work on JonBenét Ramsey's murder way back in the late 90s. And you may have read the book, Lou and JonBenét. If you have, that's great because you know some of Lou's theory and what he sort of pushes as the facts and the evidence in this case. And if you've seen the Netflix documentary, Cold Case, Who Killed JonBenét Ramsey, you will also be familiar with Lou Smit because he is a very big part of that docuseries. And that's on Netflix now. But Lance, this live show with John Wesley Anderson, we went for almost about 2 hours, and our goal was to take audience questions because naturally, with a case like this that has gone on for almost 30 years unsolved, you've got people who have opinions that are kind of all over the map. And John and Lou Smit's team of investigators and family, they really believe that there was an intruder who killed JonBenét Ramsey. And I know that a lot of people listening are shaking their heads probably already. And they're saying, what? No, I thought the Ramseys did that. Well, we're here to tell you that we don't believe that's true. We actually do believe the work from Lou Smit and the work that John Wesley Anderson is doing on this case. But it's up to you to decide. We respect your opinion no matter what. But this is a conversation about the evidence in the case and just so much more.
Yeah, totally agree with you on that. The evidence and the reports that we've seen and just the conversations that we've had with John have led us to our conclusion that it does not make sense for the family to have committed this crime for a number of reasons. And we, again, like you said, we wanted to address all of the feedback that we'd been getting from our previous episodes with John, and we did, and we had some pretty good debate going on in the chat during this live show, and John handled it very well. I think even the people who were coming at each other with differing opinions and differing theories, they were very respectful to each other as well, and that's what all we can ask for. When we started the conversation, just when we first started, I just felt like this is not going to go an hour. It felt like within the first 5 minutes, it felt like, okay, this is going to be at least 90. At least 90 minutes. And
yeah.
Yep, it proved to be just that and a bit more. Also, the release date of this is quite apropos. It was a coincidence. JonBenét's body was found on December 26th. So we're releasing this two-parter right around the anniversary. I hate saying anniversary. The commemorative date of her murder. And no matter what camp you're in, if you're in the camp of intruder theory or family theory, just take it into consideration whether or not what you're thinking is something that is proven and documented, or you're getting that information from another source that had that opinion. And I only bring this up because there was a moment in this conversation where someone in the chat said one thing about the way the family was acting, but they got that information. They were actually that person was corrected, or not corrected, but John explained they're probably thinking about that moment in this other docuseries where this woman gives her opinion on John. And that's so delicate, right? Like that concept of, well, they weren't acting like parents should be acting, but you weren't there and you're only reacting to someone else's opinion. So just have that in mind. I'm not trying to be preachy and I'm trying to talk my way around it, but that's why the family has such a negative light cast on them today, because of other people's opinions that are so public.
Yeah, and here's looking at the Boulder Police, with that, because I really feel like the Boulder Police really didn't have a good grasp on this investigation from, a few hours into it. And then they, sort of relied on the statistics that show that if a child goes missing or is murdered, that someone in the house is usually the perpetrator. That's all accepted as fact, but that doesn't mean that that's true in 100% of the cases. And, I don't believe it is here. We do have a really good conversation here about evidence, because what's evidence of an intruder to you or me or John is, evidence of the Ramseys committing the murder to, someone else who has consumed the same facts. So it is a weird case in that way, that it's a little bit of a Rorschach test, where you can kind of get the same facts and come up with a different theory. Okay, so we hope you enjoy this episode, this interview, this live conversation with John Wesley Anderson, author of Lou and JonBenét. And if you want to support Lou Smit's family and his work, in this case, it does come up very early in the conversation that there is a GoFundMe that you could donate to, and they do use that money for testing and all sorts of stuff for the investigation into the case. Nothing personal, as John explains.
So this is a two-parter, like you said, Tim, and I just wanted to make the audience aware. We will not be doing our final thoughts on this episode. We will be doing our final thoughts at the end of part 2. So stay tuned for that. A totality of final thoughts in regards to this conversation with John Wesley Anderson.
All right. Thanks a lot for listening, everyone. We really appreciate it. Please follow us on social media at MissingCSM. And we're going to take a quick break for commercial here, and we'll be right back with author John Wesley Anderson. Welcome back to the podcast, John Wesley Anderson. John, how are you doing today?
I'm well, thank you. And thank you and Lance for having me back on your show. I've really been looking forward to this program.
Awesome. We will have you back on the show anytime you want. You've been on the show in the recorded sense, where we have the opportunity to, take out our ums and our deep breaths and our start and stops. But this is live. And it's the first time you've joined us live on YouTube, so we can field some questions from the listeners, from the audience out there. And thank you to the audience for joining in. Make sure you tell your friends that we have John Wesley Anderson on, and he is a expert in the JonBenét Ramsey murder. So, yeah, thank you to the listeners out there. And, John, can you, for the handful of people who are not familiar with you, can you tell us a bit about yourself?
I can, Lance, and thank you for the introduction. I'm a career law enforcement officer, 30 years total, 22 years for the Colorado Springs Police Department. Retired as a sergeant when I was elected the sheriff for El Paso County, Colorado. It's one of the larger law enforcement agencies in Colorado, about a little over 500 personnel when I was there. And I was term limited, so I went into the corporate world, spent 10 years with Lockheed Martin, retired. And after 40 years working for either government or corporate environments, I became self-employed as a consultant and an author. I've always wanted to write. This book is Lou and JonBenét, is about one of my former homicide partners. And thank you, Tim. Lou and JonBenét, a legendary lawman's quest to solve the child beauty queen's murder. And Lou, this photograph on the cover of the book, shows Lou on the first day that I was sworn in as the sheriff of El Paso County, January 10th, 1995, and Lou was sworn in as my captain of detectives. And when we were both with the Colorado Springs Police Department, he was my one of my homicide partners, and he was 20 years older than me, so he was kind of an older brother and kind of a mentor, and became my best friend. And so when I was elected the sheriff, I invited him to come to the sheriff's office to take over a cold case of a 13-year-old girl who had been kidnapped and murdered in the unincorporated area of El Paso County, where I reside. And within 3.5 months, Lou had the suspect identified in custody, and within 2 weeks, the suspect pled guilty and took a first-degree plea on a cold case. That killer, his name's Robert Charles Brown, BRWNE, ended up pleading guilty to a second first-degree murder that Lou and his team put together, and eventually confessed to 49 murders. So if they're all true, and we think they probably are, he was certainly one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. And that case had languished for 4 years under the previous administration, seemed to be going nowhere. And with essentially the same evidence, in that case, it was a latent fingerprint. The team that Lou put together and the momentum that he generated to solve that case was what I felt is what they needed in Boulder. So Lou had retired from the sheriff's office when the murder of JonBenét occurred, and we always had stayed in contact with one another. And he had told me that the district attorney in Boulder, Alex Hunter at the time, was looking to put together a task force to investigate the Ramsey investigation. And Lou said, you may be getting a call from the DA because he's doing some due diligence, wants to know, if I would recommend Lou as part of that team. So of course I did when the DA called, and I told Alex Hunter at the time, I said, just do what I did when I was first elected sheriff. I gave the case to Lou, told him that I'll support him with anything that he needed to clear the case. And within not even a couple of weeks, probably the next time I talked to Lou after he joined the task force, that was probably March of '97 in Boulder, that he started seeing things that were wrong in the investigation. And Lou Smit was the first and only man initially who were saying, now wait a minute, I'm seeing evidence of an intruder. I don't think the Ramseys were involved in this murder. Up to that point, everybody else, to include the police department, the law enforcement community, the media, pretty much everybody had focused on somebody in the Ramsey family, either the mother, the father, or the son, and that was really the complete focus. Lou was the first person to say, wait a minute, that's not what the evidence is telling me. And he had the experience and the courage to speak out on behalf of the family. And then after 18 months working at the DA's office, when the case was being presented to the grand jury in Boulder, Lou had the courage to stand up and submit his letter of resignation to Alex Hunter and to proclaim the innocence of the Ramsey family, and that it was wrong to be trying to indict these grieving parents for a murder that they didn't commit. And then Lou worked that case for the next 14 years, the rest of his life, literally trying to bring justice for JonBenét on his own time and his own expense. And then when he passed away in 2010, his investigative notes and his computer and case file all got passed down to his children in his estate. And then after about 2 months, his children contacted me and a handful of other detectives, retired detectives at that point, and said, we're putting together a team to continue my dad's work. Would you be a part of that team? So that's what the book is about. That's why we're here today, is to talk about Lou's work and his effort to try to establish not only the proof that the Ramseys were innocent, but more importantly, that there's a killer out here, and that this case can still be solved through the DNA that was left at the crime scene.
Well said. Well said. Every time you come on, you very articulately give your background, and then you bring everybody up to speed where the case is at the moment and your relationship to the case. I was going to ask your description there, your explanation. Is that something that you ever grow, I don't want to say tired of saying, but is that something that, that has run its course for you?
Not at all, Lance. And what a great question. Let me back up and comment on. I know you read my book thoroughly, so you probably don't need any prompting. But just for the listeners or the viewers, this book is available, Lou and JonBenét, through Amazon or Barnes and Noble in any format. And so, like Tim he has a hard copy, and Lance, I think you might have had a hard copy too. But it's also available in paperback. For a little less money, it's available as an ebook. So, like Lance, if you wanted to, you could bring that up, on your laptop or whatever, and then you can do keyword searches immediately, for DNA or a person's name. But it's also out as an audiobook. And I've gotten to where I probably listen to more audiobooks than I do actually reading books, because you can, listen to them when you're in a driving or road trip or something like that. And so any format that the listeners enjoy reading their books or hearing about their books, it is available on this one through Amazon. And then, sorry, I kind of went off on a commercial there, but I wanted to make sure people knew that the book was available. Every time and our team, that we bump up, against a wall, and there's been a lot of speed bumps. Lou got a lot of criticism, when he was still alive, and still people, criticize his work. Anytime I start, feeling sorry for myself, I just think back about what the Ramsey family has gone through and what Lou went through, all on his own. At least I'm part of a team, his children, Lou's children, and other retired detectives. So I'm just part of that team. I happen to be a little more visual with you guys because of the book and the Netflix docuseries that recently came out, but the rest of the team is there. And so we're supporting one another, where Lou pretty much was there on his own. And, although we would have conversations and he would talk to his family and friends, about the case, I think, as long as he was alive, he was pursuing justice for JonBenét. But Lou developed cancer and knew that, his time was limited. And that's when he began, trying to organize the case so that it could be handed over. He put together a extraordinary PowerPoint presentation, 632 slides that are just phenomenal to see. 36 of those are in my book, Lou's slides. And then he had a spreadsheet with 883 entries and 53 columns, and it captured so much about the case, the evidence, the people that were involved. And it was so organized, you could just instantly do keyword searches and find information. And he had prioritized, persons of interest in 4 tiers, tier 1, 2, 3, 4, depending upon, their priority. And then one of the other things that I really admire him doing is he spent 8 hours with his son-in-law videotaping himself, just talking to the camera and going through his slide presentation and sharing his thoughts on the slides as he went through the slides about the case. And then that became a very important part of the Netflix docuseries, Cold Case, Who Killed JonBenét? And so you actually get to see and hear Lou explaining the case, and he knew the case better than any person alive. So in my book, I talk about, conversations that he and I had about the stun gun, for example, which he was convinced was used on JonBenét twice, on her face and then on her back, or about the garrote and that she was strangled with, or the ligatures that tied her hands together with the slip knots. But in the docuseries, they did such a wonderful job bringing Lou kind of back to life through his video and letting him, explain firsthand. So instead of saying, listening to me, say, well, I remember Lou talking about this, why this was important, you actually get to hear and see him and what he's referring to. So it's almost like a first-person discussion.
Absolutely, yeah. The docuseries on Netflix, Cold Case: Who Killed JonBenét Ramsey, is just fantastic. And I know you had a part of the behind the scenes of that docuseries. So
Mm-hmm.
congratulations on that, and well done getting this out as far as you have, because Netflix certainly sometimes drives the true crime conversation when it comes to documentaries.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what's happening here again.
Yeah.
I do just want to mention the Smit family GoFundMe,
Oh,
and I'm going to
thank
put a
you.
link here in the YouTube. And I also just want to ask who, if you could share, who else is on the team?
Well, Lou had 4 children, and Cindy, the middle daughter, has really been, kind of our pillar. She's the other children support when necessary. Dawn, the youngest daughter, is in charge of the archives. Has all of Lou's case files, and then Mark is a computer wizard, and he's helped technology-wise. But Cindy's has really been the driving force in putting our team together. We've been together now for 14 years, and she's the glue that's kind of held our team together as well. And then Lou has several grandchildren. 2 of them started their own podcasts about their grandfather and talk about the case. So they're very supportive. We meet almost monthly, not every month, but sometimes every other month, depending on what we're following and what our priorities are. So we have other retired law enforcement professionals that are donating their time. None of us are paid. We're all volunteers. All of us are no longer affiliated with a law enforcement agency. So, our access to, computer databases, is very, very limited. And, whatever the criminal justice system is. And we really are restricted to just, collecting and testing DNA. That's pretty much as far as we can go. But Lou always said that's the key to solving this case, is matching the unknown male DNA that was found on JonBenét's body and on her clothing to whoever matches that unknown male DNA. That's really the key to the case. And Kim, I'm sorry, you had mentioned the docuseries, and I really have to compliment Joe Behringer and his team with Radical Media and putting this 3-episode docuseries together. It's based in part on my book, and when I wrote the book, I purposely wrote it with 3 parts and 3 chapters in each part, and that kind of follows the format for a Hollywood movie or documentary that has 3 acts and 3 scenes in each act. So 3 acts, 3 scenes, total of 9 scenes, hoping that when a producer picks up the book and looks at the table of contents, that immediately would jump out. And it did. And I was very lucky to get a call from the head of production for Radical Media. And he said, "Hey, John," he said, "I just finished your book, and I think there's a real potential here for, a docuseries. If we did," he says, "I just want to confirm before I pitch this to Joe Behringer that the book rights are still available, and you would be willing to support the production as a technical advisor." And I did confirm the book rights were available. They ended up passing on the book rights, and I understand why. I think the producer really wanted the freedom to produce the docuseries, the 3 episodes, the way he wanted to. And it probably came out better. He's a professional there. He knows what he's doing, and he has a professional team of writers. For those people that don't get Netflix, and if you're interested, you can look at the 2020 2-hour special that just came out about 2 weeks ago, and that's accessible online too. And it's titled "Forever Young: Who Killed JonBenét?" And it covers a lot of the same information, interviews Joe Behringer, the producer, John Ramsey. And one of the last comments I want to compliments I want to add to the producer or director Joe Behringer. And I've not met the man. I'd love to do that someday. But the next day after the episode aired on Netflix, he appeared on one of the Good Morning shows, sitting next to John Ramsey. And he said, when I started this, he said, I'm kind of embarrassed. I kind of bought into the belief that the Ramseys did it. And that's what, we'd all heard. But he's sitting next to John Ramsey and he says, I can tell you now that there's no doubt that nobody in the Ramsey family was involved in the murder of JonBenét. And Lou Smit was right. There was an intruder. And I think that took great courage to come out and publicly admit that. And that's based on the fact that he had spent the last 6-8 months, in a deep dive in the case and meeting the people involved. And it convinced him without any doubt that the Ramseys were innocent.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsor.
And a thank you to our sponsors. Back to the program.
Lance and I were talking yesterday about evidence in the case, and it seems to me that what is considered evidence for some people to point at someone is not evidence for other people. And
Right.
Can you just tell us a little bit of what is evidence in this case?
Yeah. And in this case, evidence is, for example, the ransom note. Clearly, that's evidence. A 3-page rambling ransom note, very unusual, printed kind of block letters, not a cursive script kind of a writing, a flow to it. It's in studying handwriting examination, you have to look at the document, the material that was written on, the instrument that was used to write the note, or a bad check, or whatever you're investigating. In this case, the writing instrument, for example, to start with, was a felt tip pen, which is one of the worst writing instruments that you can use for forensic identification purposes. And you really need to compare, known handwriting to the document. And in this case, Patsy traditionally wrote, with script writing. That was her traditional writing style. But she was told, okay, copy this letter and it'll write it out. And there was some early indications that, we can't exclude Patsy from writing the note. That doesn't necessarily mean that she wrote the note, but one forensic examiner did make that comment. That we can't exclude her. So that went from we can't exclude her to she wrote it to she's lying. And that was really blown out of proportion. Lou found a total of 6 forensic handwriting experts. 4 of them said, I don't think that she did write it. Maybe she did, maybe she didn't. But the 6th one, who was probably the most experienced one, he had been with the Secret Service, he came out and said the exact opposite. No, there's no evidence at all in this note that Patsy wrote any part of this note. So the point is, though, that I have always believed, and this is after 30 years in law enforcement and being involved in the forensic sciences and looking at question document examination and the results, is handwriting for identification and evidentiary purposes is very subjective. It's kind of, you can kind of get out of it what you want. Depends on what side of the argument that you're on. The note itself is highly important evidence, but for identification purposes, it's questionable. So I think that needs to be parked aside. What is interesting is some of the wording, and I know you guys have gone over the note several times, but you'll start picking out terminology that are direct quotes out of movies that were playing at the time. To include in Boulder, ransom was a good example. So whoever wrote that note had studied wherever they could about committing kidnaps for ransom and use those same words. Don't try to grow a brain. That comes directly out of a Hollywood movie. And none of those movies were in the Ramseys' home. They've never watched those movies. Why would they? They're watching, Cinderella or, whatever with the kids. So somebody spent a lot of time studying those to be able to craft that message. Also, at the end of the note, the SBTC, the initials, and the word victory with the exclamation mark, that's key too. That's really important evidence. We've yet to identify what those initials stand for, but somebody, the killer or killers, certainly knows. So the note is of great evidentiary value, but for forensic identification, and scientific positive indications of who wrote the note, highly questionable. Another example, Tim, is it comes up all the time, is the pineapple. Whether or not, JonBenét had eaten pineapple, and if that showed up in the autopsy and her stomach contents, that may or may be the case. There was a bowl of pineapple, uneaten pineapple, on the kitchen table, and Patsy's fingerprints were found on that bowl. And so some people speculated, to include some law enforcement personnel out of the Boulder area, speculated, well, that shows that Patsy, was lying because, she didn't, admit that she had put that bowl there. Well, to begin with, examining stomach contents in a child's stomach the day after at the autopsy and trying to determine, how much of that vegetation material or whatever would be broken down is very difficult to determine. And did she have some fruitcake or something with pineapple in it at the party that they were at, the night before her murder? We don't. There's a lot of unknowns. But when people say Patsy's fingerprints are on the bowl in the kitchen that held the pineapple, and that means she's lying, that's just bizarre, because this is Patsy's home. I mean, you'd expect her fingerprints to be on, coffee mugs and bowls and plates. So what it shows is that she lives there. It doesn't show that she's lying. Did she take the bowl out of the kitchen or out of the kitchen cabinet and put it there and put pineapple in it? That doesn't show that sequence of events. Did she take the bowl out of the dishwasher and put it up there? So there are, in this case, some red herrings, that have really no evidentiary value. And some people may argue that with me, particularly the stomach contents. I will suggest, in trying to lead to the identification of the suspect, the pineapple means nothing. It just is really just kind of confusion, just smoke that's kind of out there. If you do get the suspect and you can compare the handwriting and make a comparison off of that print handwriting, well, then that might be valuable. But to say, from that handwriting that it's definitely Patsy, it is interesting that same handwriting, that note, the written note, was also asked by Boulder PD for samples of handwriting from John Ramsey and from Burke Ramsey. Burke was the 9-year-old older brother of JonBenét. And there's just the 4 of them in the home, the mom and the dad, and then JonBenét and her older brother, Burke, who was 9. And the police do come out later and say the handwritten note was not written by John Ramsey, nor was it written by Burke Ramsey. And so that is an opinion that's out there on the note that starts excluding them. But I don't know that you can 100% exclude somebody just from the handwriting. But what you can exclude them from is the DNA. And when the DNA was offered by the entire Ramsey family, the day of the murder, the day after the murder, their hair, blood, handwriting was taken from Patsy, Burke, John Andrew, who wasn't even home, there at the time, all of the Ramsey family, and then some other people, a housekeeper and some other people. Their blood, hair, handwriting was all collected prior to that December 30th of 1996. So 4 days after the murder, all of that comparison material, the writing, the hair, the blood, had all been collected and was being submitted to the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, CBI, for comparison purposes. And within 2 weeks of that submittal of that evidence to the CBI, a report came back from CBI that excluded every member of the Ramsey family and the other people that were there, saying that their DNA does not match what was on JonBenét's fingernails and also on her panties, and that those two samples were compatible with one another. And it is male and it's foreign. It's unknown. It's no one that's ever been identified. So until we identify who that male person is that left that genetic material. But, an investigation is a process of inclusion and exclusion. And even John and Patsy, acknowledged that, yeah, the police have to look at the family and they have to rule them out. And that was the problem that happened here, is the police looked at the family and they couldn't get beyond them. Their speculation that, it was either John, because he found JonBenét's body, and whatever Detective Arndt's comments were, she looked into his eyes and knew she was looking in the eyes of the killer, or whatever that comment is that she has on the docuseries. It's just really bizarre. Steve Thomas, who was also a lead detective with the Boulder Police Department, wrote a book about this, and he believed that Patsy killed her. So here are two detectives from Boulder PD, same unit, same investigators, same information, who come to the complete opposite conclusion. But the real bizarre thing is that, for either one of them to have been accurate, then the family, the parents, would have been in conclusion and covered up the case by staging it. And then when you start looking at the physical evidence, it's like, well, how bizarre. How could they possibly have staged this sexual violent crime? And where would they get that foreign DNA? How would that, come about? So, I think one of the things that the docuseries has done is it's brought to light, some of the facts in the case. And I had most of those facts in my book, but I think when you read text from one author, you do get their voice and their opinions. But I think when you actually see the evidence, and that's what the docuseries I think really did, was portray the evidence and Lou's interpretation of the evidence, and then the viewers also you got to kind of see both sides. The people, the special prosecutors who prosecuted the Ramseys in the grand jury, and you got to hear from John Ramsey, and you got to see video clips of when Patsy was alive and when she was interviewed. And I think what the docuseries clearly does is show that these weren't two parents that are trying to cover up and stage a accidental murder of their daughter. These are truly genuinely grieved parents, and that this case was really botched, right from the very beginning, in one series of mistakes after another, compounded by another, just to support their conclusion that the Ramseys did it. But I think the docuseries and 2020 and the book, I think all of that's beginning to, shift that public opinion away from the Ramseys. And when you really study the evidence, then you start realizing that, there is evidence to support an intruder here. There is a point of entry, a broken window in the basement. There's the comment about there's no footprints in the snow is because there was no snow on the south side of the house. But as Lou always pointed out, that DNA is undeniable, and that's what's going to solve the case.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsor.
And a thank you to our sponsors. Back to the program. Right, and it goes back to the DNA, yes, but people are behaving in a normal way, and that is what feels like to me what becomes this like guilty perception from the general public who hear these details, like John Ramsey found her. Well, he was looking for her. I mean, that's a simple thing. Patsy's DNA is on the bowl. Well, she owns the house. But one thing that we spoke about yesterday, and James Cross is here, and he has a comment, and that was the same comment and kind of confusion I had as well, which was looking for the opinion on why the killer would leave a novel of a ransom note. I'm just reading his comment. A novel of a ransom note, and the body's in the basement, but the killer's still in the house. Why would a ransom note still be there after the murder had occurred?
And it's a good question, and it's something that Lou spent a lot of time on. And what he believed, and I think the evidence supports this, is that the killer got into the home when the Ramseys were away. They went to a friend's house for dinner in Boulder. They had this other couple has kids that were the same age of Burke and JonBenét, so they were out of the home. And Lou believed that's when the suspect entered the Ramsey home, and that he was in there for several hours. And that's when he wrote the note on the notepad that was in that main level near where that spiral staircase was. So Lou believed that the note was written when JonBenét was still alive. And it is nearly a novel. It's 2.5 pages long. It is a really unusual, bizarre kind of a note. And so what Lou believed is that the suspect was laying in wait, hiding, maybe on the second floor underneath the bed in the guest bedroom. And then after the Ramseys came home, they almost went immediately to bed. It was a long day for them, Christmas Day, and they were getting up early the next morning to fly to Michigan to have a second Christmas with John's older children. And so they knew they had an early morning. What Lou believed is after they'd gone to bed, everybody's asleep, that the killer went into JonBenét's bedroom, may have used the stun gun on her the first time, right below her right ear, and that may have caused her to not be able to scream out. Don't know that for sure. But Lou thought that might have been an impact. Then Lou believed that he carried, he or they, because he always left it open to possibly being more than one suspect, but he believed that Lou believed that JonBenét was taken from her bedroom to the basement. So there's 4 levels in the house. There's a main level and then a basement, and then the second level where JonBenét and then Burke slept in that bedroom, on that floor opposite bedrooms. And then there's an upper floor. That's where the parents slept. It'd been a big attic, and they'd converted that into a master suite. So there's four levels there. And so when Lou believed that when the abductor takes JonBenét from the second floor, goes down the spiral staircase, and he's headed to the basement, that's when Lou believed the suspect leaves the 3 pages of notes on that bottom step. Then he takes JonBenét to the basement, and it's in the basement where Lou believed that the killer was perhaps trying to take JonBenét out of the home through that same broken window that Lou believed the killer had gained entry into the home. Something happened, whether she's fighting or he couldn't get her out of the window or whatever, but the plans change if in fact it was supposed to be a kidnap for ransom, which Lou believed was all along the intent. And then the killer moves her, while she's still alive, into another room. It's called a boiler room. And that's where Lou believed that she was violently sexually assaulted and murdered in the boiler room. And then after she was deceased, her body was moved to the next room, which is indicated on the crime scene diagram as the wine cellar. And Lou's diagrams are also in my book if somebody's interested. So Lou believed after the murder, the suspect leaves through the same broken window that he gained entry through downstairs. So Lou didn't think the suspect ever got back up to the main floor or any other floors after the murder, that he leaves the residence right away. So he never, picks up the note. So the note and the location where it was left clearly shows that the killers knew the pattern of the family, because there's another set of stairs that are in the house. So if he'd left them on that other set of stairs that go all the way up to the attic, then they may not have been found, who knows, for hours. But the killer must have known that somebody was going to go down that staircase and walk by those stairs to see that note. And that's exactly what happened when Patsy got up about a little after 5 that next morning and started downstairs to put coffee on or whatever she was going to do in the kitchen, is when she found the note and then told John. And that's when they find that JonBenét's missing. And that's when they dial 911 and call the police.
Not so much today, but we've in the past gotten comments about cobwebs around that window, that point of entry, that basement window. Yeah, what can you tell us about that?
There's a great quote that Lou is very familiar with, and it comes out of Sherlock Holmes novels, and it was Sherlock Holmes who cautions, says, "Do not allow the theories to dictate the facts. Allow the facts to dictate the theories." So the point being is, if you look at evidence or a fact and now you try to twist it to fit your theory, then that's flawed. You should be allowing the facts to dictate the theory. So Lou's theory, and I should mention this, that he didn't go to Boulder with this theory. He probably went like most people. Not probably, he did. We talked about this. I think when he first went up there, he thought it was going to be pretty simple case that was either going to be somebody in the family, either the mother did it or the father did it. But he's basing his opinion just off of what all of us had, the forced entry, no footprints in the snow. And it wasn't until he saw that that's not true, that's not accurate. And then so when it gets to the point of entry, the window that leads to the basement, the room they called the train room, there's a heavy metal grate, and John Ramsey had locked himself out of the home, and to gain entry, he crawled into that window well, and he broke one of the window panes. It's about an 8-inch pane near where the lock is, and he reached in and unlocked it. This is the summer before the murder, and he lets himself into the home, and then he closes the window and secures the lock. When he goes down, right minutes before he finds JonBenét's body on the morning of December 26, 1996, he points to that window and he says, that window was left open. So that's the window I broke. I let myself in when I locked my keys out. But that window wasn't like that. And he says, look, he said, there's a suitcase down below that window and it's standing upright. And what Lou found was that it was easier if you stood on something to get out of that window. You could get in okay, but getting out was kind of a different story. So Lou was convinced that the suspect had placed that suitcase there to get out of the home. So coming in through that window or leaving theoretically would have disrupted the cobwebs. However, cobwebs, as everybody knows, do they, lay over to one side or they blow over to the other side? Because later the police take photographs of the point of entry and they say nobody went through that window because there's cobwebs here. One of the other things that's interesting about the cobwebs is how quickly spiders can weave a web. It only takes maybe 12 hours, for them to create a spider web. So there's nothing to say that the web was already there and came afterwards and was reconstructed or blew in there or whatever. So Lou thought that the spider web was not evidence of nobody came through that window. He thinks, well, that's was interesting, but it doesn't exclude the possibility of someone coming in and out of that window. And then when you look at the other evidence on top of that suitcase, there was a little piece of a white packing, the white peanuts that you use for packing material, and there were some broken pieces of glass. It looked like somebody had stepped on that, and then they brought some of that debris that was in the window well to include some dried leaves into the home. And one of those dried leaves was found in the boiler room where John or the wine cellar where JonBenét's body was found. So it looked in Lou's mind that was evidence of somebody bringing in that material as they transfer that material as they went into the crime scene after crawling through that window. So Lou thought the totality of the evidence clearly, supported that window being an intruder. So when you look at evidence and you try to dismiss it as not being valid, the caution here is, again, make sure that you allow the facts to dictate the theories, not the theories to dictate the facts. So when someone says, well, I think it's the parents, that's my theory, and you try to look at the evidence from that point of view, the train tracks is a good example. One of the Boulder law enforcement detectives wrote a book and said, he thought the marks on the face and on JonBenét's back were caused by train tracks from that room that Burke had jabbed his sister in the face with these train tracks. Now, one thing that is confirmed there is the dimensions between the wounds on the face and on the back are 3.5 centimeters apart. The train tracks on that gauge of model train is 3.5 centimeters from the outer edges. However, what Lou pointed out is that's really nonsensical because there's 3 rails on that model of train track, and the center rail is the only one that has electricity going through it. And anybody who's played with model trains knows when you pull the tracks apart, you no longer have electricity that's not completing the circuit. So there's not going to be an electrical thermal discharge or burn that's left. And so somebody was trying to twist their theory. I think the train track was used to create those marks. What Lou did is he took it to that whole next level. And when he reached the conclusion, this was after he had left the Boulder DA's office investigating the case on his own, he became more and more convinced that those marks showed that the stun gun was used on JonBenét twice. And why that was so important is the parents didn't own a stun gun. They didn't even know anybody who owned a stun gun. Another theory to make sure I mention here is the theory of transfer theory, that whenever a crime is committed, the suspect either takes something or leaves something at the scene. And that was an investigative principle that Lou knew very, very well. And when he pointed out, for example, the black masking tape that was found, that was over JonBenét's mouth when her father found her down in the basement, and he pulled that black masking tape off of her mouth. That was like a 6 or 8 inch strip of masking tape, but there's no roll of masking tape, duct tape, not masking tape, duct tape, anywhere in the house. And what Lou said was, well, there has to be a parent roll, because it was torn on both edges. So if we could find, the roll, you could match that torn edge and prove that. So what Lou said is, no, this is something else that was brought into the crime scene along with the stun gun. And then the other really compelling piece of evidence was the tie down, the ligatures that she was her wrist constraints in the garrote was fashioned with a cordage. It's called paracord 550, which in 96 was fairly uncommon. Now you see more of it, it's even in different colors. It's really lightweight, durable cordage. And to keep it from fraying, you traditionally would hold a match under the end and it would melt that end. And what Lou was convinced was that showed a sequence of harmful events, and that one of the ends had been melted on the cordage, the other one was frayed, and then on the tie-down marks, both ends were frayed. And so what Lou believed in Reconstruction, the harmful events, is that someone from a continuous piece of cord had pulled out a sufficient length to fashion the garrote, which was used to not just to strangle her, to kill her, but to control her. And then the ligatures that were used to tie her wrists, that wasn't just tying her up to stage it to look like to cover up an accidental murder. Those were slip knots that were intentionally designed. That the more she struggled, the tighter that they became. So that was somebody who clearly had an intent to immobilize someone in that home. So, and there was no paracord anywhere in the house. So Lou said, when you look at those 3 pieces of evidence, the duct tape, the paracord, the stun gun, that all shows, and the intent was to commit a kidnap for ransom consistent with what the ransom note says, and that those items had to have been taken after they left the house. They left the parent roll, the rest of the paracord, the duct tape, and then they took the stun gun with them. But, those are things that can be easily discarded, after the crime. But what can't be discarded, that Lou always pointed to, is this killer's DNA. That was left at the scene, and that's what's going to solve the case.
Okay, I just want to read one of these comments that has come up from somebody calling themselves Socially. I'm going to try to do my best reading this. And then I have a question right after this comment that was posted. It says, isn't it odd for a murderer to cover up and tuck in a body after being killed? And if it was a sexual assault, why was she not naked? I think they're saying, why was she not naked? Why was she redressed? It's been proven like this was a sexual assault, right?
No doubt. I don't want to get too graphic with your listeners, but there's clear physical evidence at the autopsy of sexual penetration with a foreign object, to include bleeding, absolute overwhelming evidence, according to the coroner, who was a medical certified pathologist, that this little girl had been violently sexually assaulted. So there's no question about that.
Okay, so can you give your opinion on why she would have been redressed and not naked?
And there's no indication that I'm aware of that she was completely undressed and ever naked. What I do think there is evidence on the long johns that she was wearing for pajama bottoms. That's just what she'd been wearing Christmas Day. And when they brought her home, they just tucked her into bed. They didn't take off what she was wearing, these leggings, and put pajamas on her because she was sound asleep. When she came home, her dad just carried her upstairs. But in 2008, there was another analysis done on the long johns, and just below the waistband, there was biological material consistent with either trace or touch DNA. And what the belief was is that showed that someone had pulled the long johns down, not necessarily taking them off, but pulling them down and then pulling them back up. And that biological material did match what was underneath the fingernails and also on the panties, on the crotch of the panties. It was foreign, not known to anybody. It was male. And so it also confirms, in Lou's opinion and mine, that this killer left his DNA not only on her undergarment, but on the long johns, and that underneath her fingernails, when she's struggling to breathe, to get a grasp for air, and to undo the garrote, that's when she's scratching the assailant. Her biological material's obviously there, but there's a foreign, unknown male, possibly even two unknown male samples. That was commingled, so it's not been really definitively proven, to my knowledge, if it was one or two samples, but they've never been identified, that unknown male.
Wow. Okay, here's a question from James that I would love to ask, or it's really more of a comment. He says, just think of all the mental gymnastics that is required to explain away all the stuff that points at the parents, though. It's kind of crazy, to be honest. Question to James, but also to you, John. What is the evidence that points to the parents?
Well, that's really a good question. And how much of that is legitimate? I'll give you an example. Is legitimate or questionable? Again, on the 2-page CBI report that I sent to you and Lance, and you're welcome to post that. It's clear that the Ramseys provided, to include John, Patsy, Burke, and John Andrew. They all provided their handwriting, their blood for the DNA sample. That was the day after the murder or the following day. But on the 30th of December, 1996, that's when that CBI report was submitted to CBI, listing those persons who had voluntarily given samples. But on that same day, December 30th, 1996, Boulder Police hold one of their very first media press conferences. And the public information officer, she makes the statement that they've gotten samples for forensic comparisons from everybody in the Ramsey family except for Patsy. And then she speculates and she says something about, well, it might be because she was too distraught. Well, that was either a deliberate misrepresentation of the evidence. Some people believe that it was to force one parent to crack and give a confession or admission or admit the other parent did it, but that was a lie. That was either an inadvertent lie, it was either a misstatement, or what I believe it probably was a deliberate, deceitful information that was put out by the police to the media, who ran with it. That was put out all over the world. The media sources, tabloids love those kind of comments. But it was a horrible thing to say because it wasn't true. And many of the Boulder detectives knew it wasn't true because some of them were there at least two, and wrote a report that said, that Patsy did cooperate. She did give her blood. She did give her samples, and they even talked about how she was crying when she did this. And in their supplement, they said, she even commented, "Will this help, find who killed my baby?" And for them to know that, and to allow this misinformation or deliberate lie, to come out is just wrong. It is also wrong that they told the media that we should have the results in a couple of weeks of the DNA analysis. In fact, on the 15th of January '97, when CBI gave the report with the analysis to the family, which excluded the members of the Ramsey family with the DNA, the police acknowledged receiving the lab report, but they refused to share what the results were. They also refused to give a copy of that, or even to tell the family that, this DNA excludes your family. So they continued to investigate using this comment about the parents are under this umbrella of suspicion, and withholding information that didn't fit their theory that the Ramseys did it, hiding evidence. They hid that CBI report for at least 7 months, and had it not been for Lou Smit, I don't know that would ever seen the light of day. So this is a real example of how not to investigate a homicide.
All right, everyone. Thanks a lot for listening to part 1 of our live show with John Wesley Anderson. Part 2 will be played tomorrow on this podcast feed. Thanks a lot.